There needs to be a little bit of education. A lot of the marketing conversations are always dealing in dollar values because you're spending money and you're making more money. And it's not quite clear what bringing a customer onto the website would actually result in. But what is it they're going to want? What is it that they're going to buy? And this is where I think the supply chain guys get lost in this type of marketing conversation.
If you were to give some tips to those digital experience leaders working with operations, working with supply chain, what are those key lessons that you would kind of leave them with?
The number one lesson is,
today on the pod, we're going to be talking to Alex Yakimov. He's supply chain director for Stussy. We're really excited about this episode because supply chain is something that we don't get to talk about much on the pod. We'll talk about the importance of aligning marketing and operations and how that alignment can have a huge impact on the business. Then we'll get a chance to talk about the type of data that comes into the supply chain world and how those different types of data allow for a really flexible ecosystem to exist. And then finally, we're going to talk about having a really good, strong customer experience, the kind of experience that both acquires and retains customers, and the critical role supply chain plays in that framework. This is going to be an interesting conversation. Let's get started. Alex, we're super excited to have you on the show today. Thank you very, very much for coming.
thanks for having me.
One of the reasons I'm excited is because I love the angle that we're going to be talking about here, the importance of supply chain. One of the things that we love talking about on the pod is the importance of alignment between marketing, product, technology in delivering a really solid digital experience, especially a post-click digital experience. And when it comes to product, we often think about product design, product placement, those kinds of things, which are super important. But oftentimes you actually have product to sell, which is also super important as well. And of course, supply chain, that's your world, right? That's your jam, making sure that the product availability is there based on customer demand, but also taking into account a whole slew of other things that are super important. So I love being able to give our listeners this perspective. So to kind of jump in, we talk about that alignment, right? And the importance of having that alignment between marketing and supply chain. And when that alignment isn't there, how easy it is to fall into a real reactive mode for the organization. So as a supply chain leader, how do you help to drive things and keep things in a more proactive mode?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in supply chain in general, there is a term called sales and operations planning, whereby all the teams between sales, marketing, brand, supply chain, logistics, and if there are retail arms as well, all come together and look at the overall sales plan and figure out in their world what different triggers or what different components they need to pull together in order to make this big action plan, but big revenue plan happen. And collaboration specifically between marketing and supply chain is a bit of a struggle, at least for me in my past life, because there's a lot of very big plans that happen on the revenue side and how to attract new customers, how to sell them the product. But the lag is passing that information on, at least proactively, to the supply chain teams, which have to deal with lead times, production times, and transit, as well as buying in the right quantities in order to fulfill some of these sales plans without having too much leftover inventory. So really the communication back and forth should happen at the very beginning when that revenue plan is being projected, and maybe there's 2 or 3 different scenarios. The high obnoxious plan somewhere in the middle, and then the more conservative plan. And generally the supply chain guys, we can't plan for all 3 of them. We try and stick somewhere in the middle, and if there is in the middle, to try and find that through working with those marketing teams. And then the second part of it really is the timing. Because once you create that plan, you then put it in motion, but you have to have the product there, as you've called Ashmir. And for that product to arrive, we need to buy it, procure it, sometimes manufacture it, or if it's finished goods, just ship it to where it needs to go. And it all takes time. So the best course of action was to do these plans on a quarterly basis and allow for between 3 to 6 months for things to happen. But if you're a much more reactive market where you have to sell, there are other strategies which we can get into at a later point around pre-selling and around having a reactive supply chain or an on-demand supply chain, which is a little bit more difficult to balance.
That level of complexity, I imagine it's hard to get the kind of alignment that you really want, right? That you're really going to look for to really get the organization kind of humming, right? To get that machine run, the flywheel turning in an effective and powerful way. Can you think of a particular experience in your career where you've seen that kind of alignment, where things really just fell right into sync, and maybe the impact that came from that?
It was a while ago, but I worked for a company called Vision Direct. They specialize in online sales of contact lenses. And there was a very strong chief marketing officer paired up with quite knowledgeable operations officer. And between the two of them, they would also always have these plans about revenue, about expanding it to new markets, about looking at different price discounts. And those kind of products are very sensitive, especially online, to price discounts. So, having these two powers at the top collaborate well is the key to all the other departments working well together. And for me, what was really helpful is having that revenue plan being translated into actual products, into actual units of how many of this type of contact lens, like Yakimov Moist Daily 30s that I would sell, or even the 90 packs, and then some of the 6 packs for the monthlies. And having a revenue being transferred into a unit count, which is specific to the product, is a great start. There's a ton of work that we have to do in supply chain on the back of that and say, okay, well, these are the key products that they're going to be targeting. What is going to be the impact at a SKU level? And for us, that is in contact lenses, it's the prescription that you wear. There could be hundreds or some cases thousands of different prescriptions. So you've got to figure out what kind of customers are going to come and what is the most popular range of that physical good, the final produced good that you got to keep in stock. So having this breakdown from top to bottom and then bringing it back up to present the plan saying, this is what I'm going to do. This is what your information means to me. And this is how I'm going to execute it. This is my timeline. I need 2 months to procure enough inventory for you to execute it. But if you wanted to do it in 1 month, we could probably get half of it. And then as the sales start to come through, the rest will land and we'll just keep selling. And there's a little bit of risk involved. You discuss those risks. And in the end, they worked out perfectly. We had a pricing strategy, we had a revenue strategy, we had a marketing strategy to capture more customers, to do more outreach. There was a lot more advertising, even on, this was back in England, or on the Tube in London, you would see Vision Direct discounted contact lenses, and it made a big difference. And overall, we managed to get about 96% fulfillment rate, whereas ordinarily, with a campaign like that, especially if it's not something that's aligned within the organization, you'd be lucky to get 70, 60%.
That's outstanding. What a great example. And it occurs to me that whenever we talk to different leaders in different organizations, whenever we talk about the importance of alignment, the answer always comes back to it starts up top, right? It starts with the C-suite. It starts with the senior executive leaders, them first being in alignment and being in sync. And then, of course, that ends up trickling down to their teams, right? Because they set the tone for the organization. And that tone that they set creates a culture that really ends up allowing that kind of alignment to really thrive, right? And survive and be able to iterate over time. And I'm sure you can speak to this much better than I can. That's a challenge, right? And it's not anything against senior leadership, right? It's not that maybe the marketing leader isn't smart or experienced or savvy, or the operations leader isn't smart or experienced or savvy. It's really just, it's a challenge because you get wrapped into your own world. You get pulled in different directions in terms of the different things you're responsible for and the metrics you're being measured for. And sometimes it just becomes, I need to focus on this today, or I need to put out this fire. Therefore, I don't have time to take a step back and sit at the table, right? And get some coffee or some tea and sit down and say, hey, look, let's talk about this proactively and see how can we get ahead of this, right? Because you're just trying to keep up so much of the time. And when that happens, a lot of that pressure and stress ends up falling down to leaders like yourself, and you're having to kind of figure it out as best as you can. Again, not because it's anyone's fault, but just the reality of doing business in the world today, right?
Well, it's an interesting overview of the whole process, and I agree. And I think where the real value and how this whole ecosystem can come together is if you leave the firefighting at my level, for example. And I can deal with majority of that. And I know my boss, my COO knows that these for the right person, the role that can tackle 95, 99% of these types of challenges, it leaves my boss to do the more strategic thinking and planning further ahead. And then the same for the marketing officer, he's able to, prioritize 50% of his time to do more strategic level planning and looking further out. Then they can consolidate a lot of this information into manageable chunks that can fit into my world. And then we can also partner up and balance between the firefighting and now strategic thinking. But it's really key to have these moments with your leadership team, with the executive team, especially whether it's offsites or just quarterly briefs where you go through some of these activities. But to do that, you have to have a process. And you're so right that not everybody is fully aligned with what is this, a sales and operations planning, how does it work? Because it's mostly a supply chain term. It's been around for 25, 30 years, and it's already been evolved into IBP, integrated business planning. But still, there's a element of what are we going to do? What are we trying to achieve? How frequently and when are we going to do it? Or what is going to be the final outcome? And if that is revenue, if that is cost saving, whatever that could be, all of that needs to then be digested, reformatted in a way that the teams can understand and can work towards. And for that to happen, you really have to have those strong layers and strong levels of communication. It shouldn't all be passed down. There should be discussions back and forth between myself and the chief operating officer. And that's the relationship I was fortunate enough to have in my past lives, and I still do today, because I'm an expert in one area and he or she's an expert in another. And when we come together, we really make things happen.
You mentioned how big of a role you play, right? And the responsibility that you play in terms of creating that infrastructure and that ecosystem that takes the pressure off of your leaders and allows them to focus their time on being able to plan and be more proactive and be more strategic. So I know for you personally, having that flexible ecosystem is super important. So let's talk about that for a second. You have this ecosystem that you're using, right? You have these data inputs that you're using to make these decisions. And I'm sure for any supply chain leader, speed is of the essence, right? The quicker that you can make the right decision, like the better off it's just going to be for the organization, the business, because it's going to allow marketing to be a lot more iterative in terms of what they can do in terms of driving the product and driving sales. So what are those key data inputs for you that allow you to create such a flexible ecosystem to help support the organization?
That's a great point for me, because there are historically a lot of our demand planning and supply chain planning has really been just focused on sales. And it's historical sales. What did we do? What are we going to do today? Which works great in quite a stable market, but the internet has definitely changed that for us. And now we have this new infrastructure that we need to create within our organizations that allows us to be flexible and adaptive to things like price changes, right? To demand and trends. So, and what I mean is, since the contact lens, for example, there are some unique and third-party contact lenses that a company may have proprietary rights for, but 90%, 95% of the market is flooded with the top 4 players. And many different companies can sell their products, be as a middleman, sell direct to the consumer, because those manufacturers like Johnson & Johnson, Alcon, Bausch & they don't sell direct to the consumer. They either use, although they're starting to, I'm sure they have in the last 3 years developed something. But the point is, you have all of these different players that buy from the manufacturers and sell into the markets. Very tight, small margins. And for them, it is repetitive business, because you have to put those contact lenses in every month. You have to get a new pack, or every few months you have to get a new pack. So the real key is capturing that customer. And once you capture him or her, then there is a 90% chance that they will come back if they had a good experience. And they will keep coming back and generate that revenue consistently. So that initial price is quite critical to attract the customer in from either from the retail world, because they've always gone to the optician to buy it, or from a different consumer. So price is really key. And when you have price, you've got traffic on your website, you've got competitive pricing, you've got your stock availability, because you may not keep every single prescription in stock at any given time. And, it's still only an extra 2 days waiting time to get the product from the manufacturer to the door. But customers can be sensitive, because if they've on their last contact lens today, they just realized they want it tomorrow. Otherwise, they can't see. So this was a real test for me to create that ecosystem. And I ended up building a model that allows us to see all of these different ranges of data. And I only managed to pull about 5 or 6 together. And nowadays, whether it's Amazon or other AI planning software, they can pull in hundreds of different sources, weather included, traffic, things like that, exchange rate. So I had my own pricing data from the past. I had my own sales data. I had my own discount data on certain days or weeks where we discounted the product. Then I put in the top 5 competitors by scraping their website on a daily basis and feeding that into the mix. I had product availability. And I think it was exchange rate as well, just because we traded in many different countries. So all of those signals put together is one thing, but then you have to have a smart enough system that it utilizes that information and makes the right decision. And I think back in 2022, when I was kind of working on this, that's really where the interaction of a planner with a system like this can exceed its benefits. What you really needed is some kind of AI type system that then takes all of these signals and says, right, these are the 3 different risk levels that we can take here. And if you go with the highest risk, highest reward, this is how much revenue you can generate, but this is how many units you will need to keep in stock because of what your competitors have done and what your competitors may do in the future. And in the end, you just get a spit out of demand, you overlay it with your inventory, and then you see where those gaps start to appear, and you work backwards from that, and you start to order the product to arrive ahead of your demand hitting. And that contact lenses, again, it could be when you expect your customer to reorder next. And you can build algorithms to predict based on their reorder pattern, based on their usability, based on holidays as well that may come up where they may require an urgent supply. So all of these data points are really critical, and the only way you can make it work is if you automate it. You have to have a system that is capturing it in an automatic way. And a lot of teams that are many businesses I work in or I hear about, it's all very manual. People are putting the staff in these positions or hiring extra members of staff to just capture information. And then they put them in positions to calculate the information. And then the 5% value add, which is that final decision and risk management, that's where most companies end up. And the more we push on automated process flows and systems like AI to make that final decision push, the more we become coordinators of risk. And that's really what supply chain is truly about to me, and how it interacts so well with marketing is that you have a revenue plan with a certain level of risk. And once you agree on that risk, the rest of the model just flows. And all you're doing is just your systems are placing purchase orders, inventory is coming in, you're fulfilling demand. And then you keep just fine tuning that risk to give you the right level of inventory and secure the right level of revenue.
You touched on it a couple of times. You mentioned AI. In your career, what kind of impact are you seeing, and what do you expect to see in terms of how AI is going to really have an impact on these supply chain ecosystems, and what you're trying to do to manage and coordinate and really forecast risk?
That's an interesting question. The future of AI for me is evolving the thinking methods that allow us to get to a certain result. And that result still needs a level of validation based on the business strategy. Even if you download all of your insights of how your business operates, what are the risk limits and so on, it still, in my opinion, has to be a human interaction that takes the responsibility and ownership of that final decision to execute that program. But AI is an evolved thinking platform that can either do a lot of the data crunching for you and come up with a solution, but it needs some guidance, at least in 2025. I don't know, 2030, maybe a different type of AI. But for now, there's a lot of validation, a lot of learning that needs to happen throughout. And the advantages of using an AI type system is that it uses the brains of some of the best people out there within the supply chain world, across all industries, across the world, and it puts them into one framework. And for me to hire a person that is as capable or even half as capable is a very difficult thing to do. And training them is significantly longer, and seeing those results can be very difficult. So again, an AI is a huge aid, and it has been for me in the various parts of my supply chain, where I can bring something in, I can spend a month or so training it and refining it, rebuilding it, and then it just does 90% of the work that may take a couple of people to do.
And as I think about that answer too, right? So, you have these various data inputs, you're leveraging AI to do a lot of the heavy lifting, so to speak, the crunching, right? So that you're able to take that last piece and kind of say, okay, this is the human element I need to put in this, to be able to make those decisions, to be able to understand risk. How much risk is the organization prepared to take? Not just in general, right? But, moment to moment, right? Those market forces are going to change, the amount of risk you can take, corporate goals, right? Stock prices, all kinds of things, right, can come into play that really only a human, right, can end up taking into play. But to kind of flip this to be on the other side, right? You're trying to do this. You're trying to take all this data, this information. You're trying to manage risk, but in the end, you're dealing with people. And as you mentioned, what you're trying to deliver is a good customer experience. You want people to have a positive experience. That experience is what's going to make them make that initial purchase. And that experience is going to retain them, right, in the long term, because you're also trying to drive lifetime value as best as you can for that customer. But again, you're dealing with people, and people are unpredictable, right? So a person comes, maybe they're shopping for a particular product, something as simple as a hat, right, a t-shirt, and the one they're looking for is out of stock. And now you have to say, well, okay, well, what do I have available? How does that align with the person's expectations? Can I deliver that? Can I align that with maybe what I'm overstocked with, right? Right? How many birds can I kill with this stone, so to speak? From a supply chain perspective, and again, of course, working with marketing that has to actually communicate this to the customer in terms of merchandising, upsell, cross-sell, all those kinds of things. How do you find that you work best to protect that lifetime value, to keep that customer engaged, to help maintain that experience from your perspective?
It is important more than ever to have that level of communication and that level of strategy at a product level, to know, for marketing teams and for the supply chain teams to know that there is a connection. Whoever comes up with the idea, sometimes you're right, it is marketing teams that provide that level of substitution, sometimes supply chain to say, we have a lot of inventory, because the marketing teams may not see that. So once you collaborate in such a way, and you can start to predict, even if you're 60% right of predicting the customer behavior, is better being prepared and actually having done some work to make those connections, both on Shopify, on the front end, or Magento, whatever you use on the website, but also on the back end with your planning software to say, if I'm seeing a slowdown in demand on this product, look at this other product to see if it's picking up, or look at the overall category, see if it's doing something similar. So there is definitely a huge connection between these different areas and how they really come together, and people are at the front of it. You're absolutely right that we have to put that customer first. It's interesting that in Stussy as well, that within the apparel world, sometimes products do sell out, and the production lead times, unlike contact lenses, are 6 to 9 months. If you're lucky enough, you have a very staggered supply chain where you have partially finished goods at various stages of fabric production that you can quickly ramp up supply chain. But it's rare that, unless you have your own in-house manufacturing, that you can get product in within less than a month. It's normally between 1 to 3 months. So in those kind of situations, again, you have to have the signals, you have to have the understanding of how these products will be acting. And when the product does come out of stock, having that level of substitution, you're right, it's more important than ever. but it can't be done in silo. Because I have worked in an environment where the real brains were put together into designing a website and constantly adapting the order in which classes appear on the website. And there was an algorithm that would do a quick test way before AI was a big topic. Would do a test for an hour at a certain time to see what type of frame would sell best. And then it would really push these items up and push these other items down. And the supply chain and turnaround for frames could be, again, 3 to 6 months. So when you're seeing a 7,000% increase from your daily or weekly sales up to this because there was a decision made, what ends up happening is you sell through all of your inventory, because where you spoke about what if you have some excess, you want to get through that. Well, it's so effective that we just, as supply chain planners, do not have enough time to crunch the data and to actually bring more product in until you get to a very bare kind of website, because all of your inventory is so minimal. So that's really the hardest part. It's considering all of these great movements and projections and algorithms that all come together, but take in consideration lead time and time, because you may gain that revenue for this month, but for the next 2 months, guess what? You're going to be very low on inventory and very low on sales, and that's going to have a significantly worse customer experience overall than having a more stable model and maybe not everybody buying the most latest or the best pair of best pair of frames that's available.
It's funny, as you talk through that, I really think about the paradox of your world, right? Because from a marketing perspective, one of the things that we work with our clients on, especially when we're trying to optimize their experience, is leveraging these psychological kind of triggers, right? And one of the biggest and most effective ones that we see commonly is scarcity, right? The same principle of you driving by this small restaurant, and there's a line of people around the corner to go to this restaurant, and you think, this is great, I want to go to the restaurant. Not that you want to wait in line for 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, but if it's that popular, it must be great, right? So, on the one hand, there's the frustration of the customer saying, oh, this is out of stock. On the other hand, there's this thing I want, this is popular, it's out of stock. Like this must, this is a popular thing, right? It almost kind of feeds itself, right? Has marketing and other teams, right, try to pull those triggers, right, or maybe pull those triggers, right, to use those levers of things like scarcity? How do you balance that from a supply chain perspective, right? Because it's like sometimes, brands will even purposely only produce X amount of something, right, to be able to kind of say, hey, this is a limited edition thing, right? We're just putting this out to a certain amount of people. How does supply chain, or how should supply chain come into play when it comes to those plans and decisions?
It's really tough, especially for supply chain professionals who have been brought up through, supply chain has been around for several hundred years and really has evolved since in the last century. But the key was always keeping just the right amount of inventory to keep things going. And here you're going against the trend. You're saying, right, this is my current model and I need there to be just enough so I can make a quick buck, but I can generate the trend and I can kick something off. I mean, fortunately, there aren't a huge deal of brands that do that at the moment, because it again is counterintuitive. You're limiting your revenue, but the key is that you're thinking ahead of how I can constrain my demand on this product, bring something similar to the market that we now have test data for in much larger quantities. And people are now thinking, well, I missed out on it last time, but this time I've got a chance of something similar or maybe even exactly the same, and I'm going to get it. And now everybody comes back and buys it. But the trends, especially in the power, can come and go just very quickly. So if you don't capitalize on that initial launch, even having a product 3 days later could completely eliminate the demand, especially when a lot of your consumers are, and a lot of the drive and the buzz around this is through people getting it first and posting it on Instagram, just showing it off, right? And once enough people have it, it's no longer the thing that everybody's looking for. So it's a very tough and difficult proposition to execute. The only good thing in all of this is it's very targeted, and marketing would only do that with a small percentage, like 10% of your product offering or less. Meanwhile, the supply chain guys just grunt through the work and get the rest of the 90% to flow in the regular model as it's supposed to. So that's kind of where I sit with this whole thing. And it's been a fun experience. I've seen it quite a few times in various different companies that I worked in, and it always throws you off, but we get the job done.
It's funny, it occurs to me as we're having this conversation how important it is that when marketing teams or product teams are thinking about the website experience and thinking about personalization, thinking about experimentation, right? A/B testing, those kinds of things, how it's really important in those planning phases to bring supply chain to the table, right? Because those kinds of decisions can and arguably should have a direct effect on supply chain. So having supply chain leaders' inputs into the strategic planning around experimentation, around personalization campaigns, merchandising campaigns, right? Those kinds of experiences that are happening on the website could really make those things just many times more powerful, more effective, not just from the customer standpoint, which of course is critically important, but all the way down the operational side of the business as well, right? So you're really maximizing the benefit of those campaigns that you're running to really understand what people want and iterating on that experience over time. Is that something that you've ever had a chance to be involved in?
Yeah, about a few times. And the only struggle that I've had in the past is a lot of the marketing conversations are always dealing in dollar values. And because you're spending money and you're making more money, and it's not quite clear what that bringing the customer onto the website would actually result in, right? And what that expectation is. Well, we expect them to be happy and walk away with a sale and get what they want. But what is it they're going to want, right? What is it that they're going to buy physically, and what variant of that product that they're going to buy, right? And this is where I think the supply chain guys, they just get lost in this type of marketing conversation. And I think that's where there needs to be a little bit of education, both with the marketing teams and the supply chain teams, to be able to translate their world to the other world, right? And start to bridge those connections between marketing investments in a particular market, in a particular region, into actual products that we're going to target to make sure that at least 80% or 90% of our new customers can benefit from without being disappointed. And it's an evolving thing. But again, going back to AI, I think this is where you can leverage a well-trained AI business planning model to make a lot of these decisions for you. And it will do it top down, and it will do it bottom up, from product all the way up to region and to the dollar value, and help you make some of these strategies. And if I look back at that model I spoke about earlier, where clearly we're balancing different products throughout the website on an hourly basis, if you trust your system well enough, or if you've got enough metrics to monitor the impact of those, you can automate the full function. So you can automate it from the type of investment you're doing, when and how, and the type of purchasing you're doing as a result. And it will constantly evolve and refine itself. And us as the professionals within these areas, what we have to do is just monitor it and make sure that it's not getting, out of control, where we can't manage the demand or manage the supply, or we are exceeding the capacity of the website. I don't know what those factors could be. In my supply chain, well, the biggest struggle with sudden increase in demand is that manufacturers will not produce the volume that you need, even if you want it, even if you place the orders. They have other customers, they have other regions and other more important customers in some case that they have to take care of. So you have to know those limitations. And I think in the early stages of this process, that's where the supply chain and the marketing guys should be talking together, is talking about the types of products that we're going to really target and what those limitations are in case things do work out the way that we plan for them to work out.
Alex, your experience is so vast. You've worked with the startup world. You've worked with more legacy retailers. You've worked with luxury. As you think about that, as you think about your experience, If you were to give some tips to our listeners, some lessons to those digital experience leaders in terms of what they can take away from working with operations, working with supply chain, in order to more effectively do what they need to do and kind of hit their metrics and goals, so to speak, what are those key lessons that you would kind of leave them with?
The number one lesson is have conversations with your supply chain team. Set up those regular meetings, those regular reviews, find the middle ground, find a similar language that you can all talk together about. And really that is sales and operations planning. So educate yourselves with what that process is and how it's well performed. There's a ton of consultancies out there that specialize in implementing that across many businesses and supporting businesses through the iterations that they have as that process kicks off. But that communication is really critical to at least start the conversation. And once you get into it and once you're finding that, okay, we're now telling each other what our plans are, what our limitations are, or what our overall strategy is, it then comes to how we communicate the numbers, right? And it's, yes, revenue, but what does that mean in units and how? And the supply chain guys aren't often the ones that can figure out and what that product should be when a customer comes in, what are they going to buy? That type of analysis sometimes is best done more at the holistic level, more part of the marketing world when reviewing the demand, and then passing that off to somebody who can actually execute that demand. And I think this is an overall area that we struggle with across the industry. And I've talked to a couple of university lecturers in the past, trying to encourage students to go into this gray area and really fine-tune their expertise at university level to come into the world and be able to make those connections without just relying on data. Because a lot of people just look at spreadsheets and they think they've got it all figured out, but there is a huge layer beyond that that we're really missing out on.
Yeah, that's great advice, and even advice for me to take away from in terms of my education on the impact, the things that we're doing have on supply chain and how supply chain can really be a partner at the table to help us understand how we can have a better impact overall for the organization. Alex, thank you so much for your time today. Great conversation, so interesting, and so happy to have you on the pod.
Shamir, thank you so much for having me. That was very interesting.